Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I will be co-writing this podcast
with my co-host, Matt Freeman.
You might be thinking, won't that make this podcast feel a bit disjointed and
awkward?
Yes.
It
will. This week on the show, we are taking one final look at Stephen King and Peter Straub's The Talisman. That's right, it is our overview episode where we will be talking about the book as a whole and also answering many of your mailbag questions, some about the book itself, some about the future books we're going to be covering, and some random ass questions we got from our listeners, Matt. It's one of those fun, casual episodes that we love to do so much when we finish the book. I, for one, am very excited about it.
Me too. I really look forward to an opportunity to digest this book as a whole, because I think even more so than other books, it is rambling in a certain way, and I haven't really had a chance to put all the pieces together and look at them and see how they come together.
Yeah, so hopefully by the end of this podcast, we've completed the puzzle that is The Talisman, or maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. Before we get into our conversation, though, we just had one quick announcement. We wanted to plug another one of the shows on our podcasting network. That's right. We say Doof Media Podcast. We don't say what that means very often, but we have a collection of podcasts on our network. You've heard about some of them before. You've heard about Do the Right Thing, which we did for our partnership with on our Do the King Thing contest last year. We will be doing another one of those here pretty soon, Matt. I think we're going to start just round 2 of that here sometime during the summer, I think. But
all right. Yeah, those are always awesome.
Yeah. But another podcast we wanted to plug real quick is one called The View from Halfway Down. I think we maybe have briefly talked about the show before here, but this is a BoJack Horseman episode by episode recap and analysis podcast by a couple of our Doof Media partners. They are just reaching this week the end of season 1 of BoJack Horseman, so they are wrapping up episode 12 of the show, and I think it's a great place to jump in. And it's a show that I really like. I really love BoJack Horseman, and I really enjoy listening to these two great hosts talk about it. So if you haven't given The View from Halfway Down a shot yet, but you have enjoyed BoJack Horseman, please consider checking out that podcast. We like it. Alexandra and Sebastian are doing great work there. So check out The View from Halfway Down, and hopefully we'll see you there in the discussions of that show.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, that is it, Matt. Let's talk about The Talisman. And I think the place to begin here is, now that you are 1 week away from finishing the book, what is your overall feeling right now on The Talisman? How does this book stack up to you?
So when I just allow myself to, in kind of a free association way, think back over the book, what strikes me are a series of images and feelings that are associated with the emotional high points or the emotional low points, the emotional interesting points, the visually creative or narratively shocking moments scattered throughout the story. And so overall, I have a very positive feeling about the book. What's funny is it's almost like the actual plot of the book has like already faded into an indistinct haze. And like a year from now, I'm not going to remember like what actually happened in the book, but I feel like I'm going to have memories of a lot of these images and these just like creative set pieces for the rest of my life. It does feel different from the other Stephen King books. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on to what my experience with this book was. You know, I think this reread was an interesting experience for me because while I remembered broadly all the things that happened in it, there was a lot of moments of discovery for me where I just had genuinely forgotten that this is where we go after this, and that this is what happens, and the exact thing you're talking about there, the movements of the plot are things that I just don't think about a lot when I think about this book. You know, I think I've never loved this book. And I've always enjoyed my time with it. Like every time I've read it, I liked reading it. I had fun with it. I think I have a very similar feeling towards this book that you do. But I also can't help but always think about the idea that it's never really stuck with me. It's never going to be on my like top 5 list or top 10 list of Stephen King books. And not to say that if it is on your top 10 or top 5 list, you're wrong or anything, but I do think that this time through it really brought to me a lot of the reasons why I think that is. And I think one of the biggest is that it just does kind of feel a little bit disjointed. And I mean, I think the biggest topic that you and I are going to talk about here over the course of this episode in particular is the major difference between this book and all the other books we've covered, which is, of course, that thing we talked about at the very, very beginning of this book. The fact that it was co-written, right? The fact that this is not a Stephen King book. This is a Stephen King and Peter Straub book. And I think that is to the book's strengths in a lot of ways, but also some of the biggest weaknesses I have with the book is a result of two minds working together on one story.
And not just two minds working together on one story, but two minds sort of trying to pretend that they're not doing that.
Yeah.
Which is really unusual, actually. And so you know, one of the books that we've covered, I'm trying to remember how many books we've covered that had two authors.
Not
at least
too many.
two. But you know, one of them jumps to my mind, where the authors literally switch back and forth between the characters. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and that way, you know, when you change in voice and you change in style and you change in perspective, that's expected. That's fine, because we're used to reading novels where we change all those things between characters. And it didn't, you know, if anything, it sort of enhanced the experience.
Yeah.
This was very different because from page to page, you don't really, you get you're almost in like a dream state where you're like, what, like whose vision is this? You know, you feel like there's some dirt on the lens of your reading brain camera, because you're never like, everything is sort of inconsistent is the word I want to say. Although it's like,
sure.
It's weird because you could say like, well, what do you mean? What's inconsistent? I'm like, I don't know. Like a lot of little things, like the tone, that like the way it feels, what it feels like the themes of the story are. I feel like I'm coming down too hard on it here, because I did enjoy my time with it, and it did create all these fun set pieces and images in my mind. But I think in the end, in the final analysis, I think this is the time to talk about the overall effect of the two-writer thing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, and I want to be careful here, because I don't want to be like, I had a harder time sussing out the themes of this book, and therefore it is an inferior book. I don't want to say that, because I don't think that's necessarily true. But I do think that, like, you know, we went back and forth on the meaning of so many different things over the course of this book. And one of the big questions I'm going to have for you here in a little bit is what are the territories? You know, like what do the territories represent? And I don't know if I have a clear answer on that. And that is one of the problems with the book, is that I do think that, like, it you know, there are moments where you feel like, we talked about this throughout the course of our whole thing with the book. There are moments where I feel like this is definitely Peter Straub writing this. I feel Straub there. This is definitely Stephen King writing this. I feel King here. But it is true that it never melds into something new. It's just this weird kind of amalgamation. You know, this gets to, actually, if you want to know my real complaint with the book, and I hate making complaints like this, because it's like, it's what I would have done complaint. But I think this goes into one of our first listener questions that comes from 300-pound Pizza Queen, who asks, how would you handle co-writing a book? It seems like for this book, each author wrote a chapter or two and then passed it back and forth, and some things got forgotten or changed. Do you think there's a best way to do it? Well, here's my general idea here, Matt. And I think it does go to what you talked about, the book you were talking about that we've covered in the past, which was This Is How You Win the Time War, or This Is How You Lose the Time War. I don't remember.
Yeah, this is how you lose.
Which was a book, as you said, where it's letters back and forth between two characters, and the authors wrote those letters to each other, and that's kind of how they communicated about the book and in making the book. And I think the best way to do a story with two authors writing it is to work the idea that two authors are writing it into the story. And I think about this book, and I think about how one of the most important things to this book is the concept of duality, right? The concept of having twinners, the concept of two different worlds. And I'm like, what if one of them only wrote the stuff that took place in the territories and the other only wrote the stuff that took place on our world?
Yeah.
And then whenever Jack flipped, they handed the book off to the other person. And look, this could actually be the way they did it. We don't know for sure. I've looked this up. I've had some people send me some interviews with Peter Straub that go into a little bit more detail with how they wrote this, but it doesn't seem like that was how it was done. And I'm like, what if they worked the idea of them being two different people writing the same book into the general idea of the book in that way? And then what you get is, well, the stuff in the territories feels unique and a part of itself, and the stuff in our world feels unique and a part of itself, and you feel a distinct difference between those two worlds because the tone of the writing is different, the pace of the writing different, the voice is different, and I'm just like, oh, that would have been such a good idea.
Yeah, and it really doesn't seem like they did that.
It doesn't, no,
as far as I can tell. You know, I mean, I agree. I think that would have been a great idea. You know, in terms of the best way to do it, like, So I've written a few things with a co-writer, some of which I think almost none of which have ever seen the light of day, really. But you know, one of them, what we did is we separately thought up. There was sort of a fantasy setting, so we separately thought up, like we each sort of took a continent and we thought about the fantasy background of that continent, and then we took a couple of characters who were from that continent, that setting. And then the story was going to be sort of the clash of cultures between these two places. So that was a fun idea because it was like we went off into our separate creative universes. We thought of things, and then there was a lot of fun sort of friction and useful creative conflict in the fact that we had gone very different directions with our two settings. And you know, and then obviously the person who kind of thought up the character is going to be the one who writes the point of view of that character. And like you said, like I honestly don't think that I would ever try to write a book like this, where it's like, yeah, we're going to co-write it, but we're going to not do any clever tricks to sort of pretend to take advantage of the fact that there's two people.
Well, but the interesting thing is I have to believe that the idea to do a story in which someone is flipping between two different worlds came to them while discussing the idea of writing one story with two authors, right? Like it feels like it aligns too much for that to just be a coincidence, right? Mm-hmm. And yet it doesn't feel like the book takes full advantage of what having two authors could provide to that story. It just feels like a story about duality that happens to be written by two people. They were sitting in a room thinking up their fun book ideas, and then one said, oh, what if we did it where there's two worlds because there's two of us? And the other said, that's neat, let's do that. And that's really as far as they went into it. And I know I'm being incredibly uncharitable to two incredibly talented authors that I love, but I mean, that's kind of the way it feels at times.
Yeah. I don't have much more to add there. It definitely seems like an idea that they were kind of brainstorming and riffing amongst themselves. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think so. Here's a framing you could put on it. Like, okay, so the reason why me and my friend never published anything with our co-written story is that it's endlessly fun and endlessly time consuming to think through and elaborate on the complicated planning for how you're going to build this cool world together. Way less fun and way more work to just fucking write the book. And I think these are two actual professional writers, and probably what they did is they like did some brainstorming and thought up some ideas, And then when it came to the actual mechanics of writing the book, for all we know, maybe they intended on doing exactly what we just described. And then one of them 1 week, was like, oh, I accidentally wrote like also the part in the territories in addition to the part on Earth I was supposed to write. Sorry. And then the other writer was like, that's fine. I'm a professional. I can deal with it. And then like, it seems like a project that kind of just had its own momentum because these guys are like accomplished. They're doers. They're workers.
Yeah.
They sit at the keyboard and they write. And the sort of holistic perfection of the thing suffered for that. But the truth is, in actuality, if you prioritize the holistic perfection of the thing, then you never actually write the book and you never get published.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I mean, it's very easy. Like this is what I talk about all the time. It's very easy for me to sit back and say, hey, would be cool if they had done this. But in my coming up with that idea, I don't actually have to work through the logistics of how to make that work in a real sense. I mean, like there's moments in this book where like Jack flips back and forth, within pages of each other. Right. And so like, how would that work? Would you deliver some pages to your writing partner and then be like, you know what, man, I'm pretty busy this week. Here's one page. And then he just goes back. You figure out what he goes from here. But I mean, there's part of me that gets kind of nerdily excited by the idea of, someone builds up to a sequence that they can't get out of and blah, 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 and then I flip and now I'm safe from that sequence. And then you hand it off to the other guy and then says, okay, now you have to figure out what happens next. That seems like such a fun exercise. And I'm sure that at some point in the process, that exact thing I'm describing happened, but it doesn't seem like that was like a hard, fast rule that they stuck to. I just like, I think what it does overall, what this book being written by two people does for me is it makes some of the sequences in this book absolutely incredible. The individual moments, the individual characters, just wonderful. And Wolf is one of the best Stephen King characters ever. He's wonderful. There's a reason why everybody loves Wolf. But the book as a whole, when I look at the book holistically and I say, okay, what did we learn here? What is this about? What is it doing? It just doesn't hang together for me in a super satisfying way. So, and I think that's a result of, like Stephen King wrote a great fucking sequence in the Sunlight Home that was just aces. And then Peter Straub wrote a great fucking sequence that maybe he wrote the Blasted Land stuff. And I enjoyed that thing individually, but it just creates a series of these individual vignettes and the overarching story doesn't work as well as the individual pieces of it do.
Totally agree. Yeah. The vignettes, that's what I was saying about like the plot disappearing into a haze and just leaving you with cool images because the vignettes, like, the Blasted Lands, awesome imagery. Like I've got, when I say imagery, what I mean is I have a vivid mental image of what the Blasted Lands look like and like this train going through and Jack looking around and seeing like weird shit like creeping around the hills, hiding from him. I have a bunch of images like that from all over these stories, and that's really the coolest thing about it to me.
Yeah, I mean, from just a general prose perspective, this is some of the best writing I've read on the show. Like there's moments in this book that it's just like, I think I pulled more quotes from this book than I have any book in a while because so much of it is just flat out beautiful. And I just enjoyed reading it aloud before we discussed it.
Yeah, me too.
So I mean, I think that's kind of overall how we feel, and we'll get into more of that as we go. But I really, really like this book, but the thing preventing me from loving it, I think, is the same thing that makes it very unique in all these books.
Yeah.
And I guess the question we've got to ask ourselves, and we'll talk about Black House at the end of the show, but the question we've got to ask ourselves as we move away from this topic is like, what will that book feel like in comparison to this one? Is that going to have similar problems, or in the years between those books, have they managed to fix that problem? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they agree with us, or like in the sense of, they did the book together and they're like, hey, that was kind of cool. But I noticed that I didn't, this didn't work the way I wanted it to. How can we we make it so that we don't have that specific kind of problem again? And so maybe it'll come together much better.
Yeah, we will see for sure. Do you want to read the next question we have from Sigma before we move on to another? Because I think this kind of ties into what we've been talking about.
The next question, Sigma says, what do you guys think about the book's environmentalist themes? To me, it feels sloppy and incohesive, like it has a vague understanding of the issue and nothing more.
I think the reason I put this here is because I think it relates to what we were talking about with the inconsistencies between the authors, right? Yeah. I think the book is very, like, we can't not say that the book is not touching on environmental themes, in that there are moments and beats and things happening all throughout the book about how shitty our earth is and how the smell of oil and industry. And I think this is definitely something that King has done in The Dark Tower broadly and in his other stories, you know, this general environmental humans have destroyed the earth type of thing. But it is true that, like, this is not actually what the book is about in any real way. And so, like, it does just feel kind of, you know, thrown in there and tacked on and be like, this is just another example of why the territories are better, I guess. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely felt like one of them cared about that more than the other, because it would pop up kind of randomly and, yeah, inconsistently. It was throughout the story, indeed. Like you said, we had the grossness of the real world compared to the territories was mentioned, but it was only mentioned a few times. Like, I can think of only really 2 or 3 times where it was really fixated on. We had the mention of the nuclear weapons leading to fireballs in the territories, but nowhere did it really culminate. You know, there was no moment where it's like, and, you know, and then Jack did something and it had to do with the environment in some way. No, there's nothing like that. It's just there. It's just kind of a thing in the story, which, I don't know, felt tacked on. Yeah.
To be fair, I think this is the way it feels in The Dark Tower as well. You know, like, I think in The Dark Tower, there's this constant kind of refrain of the destruction of the world. You know, we get this idea that the old ones destroyed themselves and destroyed the world, and the reason the beams are failing is because they kind of forced magic out and replaced it with technology, and there's all these ideas present here about, you know, magic versus tech, but that's not really what The Dark Tower is about. I mean, it's certainly there, and you could certainly, like, work that into one of the central themes of The Dark Tower, but that's not, like, that's just another thing that they threw in there that the King included there. So I feel like that's kind of generally in a lot of his books. Like, I think he's a very political minded person, and he's thinking about things like this a lot. And I have no doubt that in the 80s, when they were writing this book, King or Straub or both of them were thinking about, you know, coming out of the 70s and the oil crisis and all this stuff and the rapid expansion of the 80s. You know, these are things that probably were on their mind, and so let's work them into the book, but they don't work them into them in any kind of concisive, overarching way, for sure.
Yeah, it's certainly not like, you know, for example, you could have had Sloat be, you know, a oil executive, like, or anything to actually tie it into the plot somehow. I mean, maybe that would feel too on the nose, but then but then I would say, well, if that's too on the nose, then, like, are you trying to talk about the thing or not? I'm trying to decide if I'm being unfair here, because
maybe a little.
There, like, I definitely like it when books or movies or whatever have everything is aligned behind the thematic purpose, like you know, like, it's a clockwork machine where every single element is can be viewed through the prism of the theme, and there's no extraneous pieces where you're like, but what about this? Like, you know, depending on what book you're talking about, it could be, you know, the characters, their backstory, the magic system, the history of the world, all of these things. But, like, in this story, it's like there's a lot of things that don't actually come together. There's a lot of things that don't actually add up on the page to like, ah, yes, I see. We were heading toward this resolution all along. It's like, no, that I don't know what that has to do with anything actually. So.
Well, I guess my question on that would be, is that something that Stephen King ever really delivers? And is that something we need from him? Because I'm thinking back to The Dark Tower, and I don't think, for all, I think the ending comes together beautifully. There's a lot of disparate ideas going on over the course of these 7 books. They're big books, they're sprawling, they're talking about a lot of things. And there are a lot of things that are kind of brought up that don't necessarily, tie perfectly back into a taut bow of what the overarching theme of the series is. So I don't know if that's something I necessarily need from King. I will say I noticed it more here than I normally have.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think that his superpower is to be a storyteller who can just kind of go. Mm-hmm. And as he goes, maybe he decides he wants to talk about robots in this book. And then there's a really bad robot, and then there's a train, but then there's also a good robot who helps. And then maybe later there's another good robot who helps. And in the end, you're left thinking like, well, wait, like, what was I supposed to think about robots? And you can kind of think about it, and you can connect the idea of robots to a few other ideas in the story, but it's not like he sat back and sketched out this elaborate plan involving how to thematically incorporate robots. I think he literally just wanted to have robots be in the story.
Yeah. I wonder just like, this is one of those moments where I'm like, is this any different from any of the Dark Tower books? And I just connected to those emotionally more. And so it didn't bother me there, and it bothered me here, which is a thing that definitely happens in storytelling all the time, right? Like,
yeah,
if you connect emotionally to a story, the things that you're not bothered by things that you would be bothered by in a story that just didn't quite connect for you as well. So I don't know. Like, I don't know if this is something like, I don't know if the book would have been better had they like perfectly landed the environmentalist themes. Like the other thing I was thinking about while you were talking about like, well, Sloat could have been an oil baron, is like, I still don't know if the idea of Jack's mother being an actress, Jack's father and Sloat being talent agents mattered at all to the ongoing story in any way. But I stop myself when I say that and be like, well, so what? Why does it have to? And I'm like, well, it doesn't have to, but like, in a world where, we firmly believe that every choice in a story is intentional and is leading to some greater revelation or something, I want to be able to look at that and say, yes, of course she was the queen of the bees. And it's not just because this is how we work queen and royalty into the thing. It's for a greater thematic reason as well. And I just can't see it here. But yeah. I don't think that's bad, because the book works overall. I liked reading it. So I don't know.
There's other stuff that I could mention, like the environmentalist thing reminded me, and I think I mentioned this back a while ago, this whole idea, I don't know if it's originally from Arthurian legend or if it's older than that. I think it might be older than that, actually. But there's this idea in myth that like the king and the land are one, and when the king has left, then the land is ill, and the only way the land can be restored is for the king to return. And this shows up in Lord of the Rings, by the way. Tolkien didn't invent it. It's a mythic sort of archetype or archetypal concept that Aragorn returns, and King Arthur I think returns at some point. And anyway, I'm not an expert on this, but I know this is a thing, and I thought that's what we were doing here. I thought it was like Jack/Jason return and heal the land, but then we didn't do that. and that left me pretty confused, honestly, because I was like, oh, we're definitely doing this the king is the land, and the return of the king will heal the land thing, and that just didn't happen, and I felt kind of confused.
Yeah, I mean, I think they like, we talked at the beginning about the hero's journey and about all these type of things, but it's much closer to just a Huck Finn type fable than it is a broad like hero. Like he rejects becoming the king, like very specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. But he does sort of heal the land.
He
I
does.
guess.
He does. I mean, he releases the white, which heals all lands. You know, like he unlocks like the supposition we have to make here, and how this ties exactly to the Dark Tower is a conversation for another day. And by another day, I mean maybe like 20 minutes from now. But the white is trapped in some way in the hotel, in the stone. The sword is trapped in the stone. Someone sent us a message saying that they compared the white to like Excalibur trapped in the stone, and it's very fragile, but which is an image I really like. So and Jack frees the white and then releases it into the land, and the land begins to heal, right?
Yeah. No, you're right. I think the problem is that was basically just Speedy saying like, land's healed now, and like I didn't feel it.
We did get those vignettes about like how the white coming affected all those people, good and bad. So I think that covers that to me.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think it's a lot of disparate ideas, and I think we were still on Sigma's question, but I agree with you that the environmental themes just aren't. It's a big deal in the story, and I think, but I would say that that's true across, you know, the Dark Tower as well.
Yeah, sure.
All right, Matt. So now we have to ask you the big question. What are the territories?
Yeah.
I want to read a question from Complicated 9519 here to kind of help frame this conversation. So first they say, we know the talisman represents the tower, and I could have heard the audiobook wrong, but the talisman flipped between Jack's world and the territories. How could this be? Is the talisman the tower for both worlds? Does the territories and Jack's world share the same embodiment of the tower? Are they on the same level or just really close to the same level? To answer that question, I think the talisman doesn't flip with Jack so much as it is present in all versions of reality. And so when Jack flips with it in his hand, it's just still there because he's flipped and the talisman remains where it was. That was my interpretation, at least.
I mean, I don't know, man. That's it's a great question. So what are the territories, and what is their relationship to the talisman? Okay, let's.
So I think maybe the place to start here is to ask you the question that I asked you near the end of the book. The book says the territories are essentially good, right?
Yeah.
The book states this. Here at the end, do you still disagree? Because you disagreed in the moment. And what do you think they represent metaphorically in the story? I mean, we can start with metaphor and then work our way back to what are they literally?
So if we take the story kind of literally, the territories are inherently good. Maybe all of the evil stuff that was infesting the territories, like the evil tree and everything, evil trees, and Osmond, maybe those were all just, magical symptoms of this problem, this, the Black Hotel problem, whatever we want to call it. Something that had been done to the world, and indeed, the territories are just pure and good. So I think one way to go about this is to say what the territories are not, and I do not think the territories are meant to be the world of story in the way that Midworld is kind of the world of story. I'm seeing not very much evidence for that. It seems more like the territories are just another world that has magic. They're just a fantasy world that has magic that's really good. I mean, Narnia is actually a closer analogy than Midworld is, because Narnia is a sort of beautiful, perfect, magical shadow of our world, and I don't know metaphorically. I'm kind of hoping you have an answer for me, actually, because we've had this whole book to think about it, and I don't really know what the territories are metaphorically. Like if I fumble for it, which I'm still fumbling, by the way, like it's not like I'm certain. It's like it's something to do with the idea of growing up and childhood, and the challenges. So we've got this whole hero's journey thing where he does the road of trials and so forth, and it's like, and then at the end of the story, he loses all of his memories, or he's going to lose all of his memories of the journey, and it's like, well, maybe the idea there is he has gone through the struggles of adolescence, and now he's no longer a child, and so he's leaving the childish things behind. And I don't know, man. Like I know that I'm like rambling and grasping here because I really don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think my opinion is that the territories are childhood. I think, and I think in all the ways that is, overpoweringly beautiful and wonderful and awe-inspiring, and the ways in which it is terrifying. In when you're a child, scary trees aren't just scary trees, they're scary trees that will reach out and eat you, right? When you're a child, this magical kind of kingdom, but at the center of it, a queen that's dying, and what that represents to kind of bring down the idea of a perfect childhood, right? Going on an electric powered train through a wasteland. These are all like very powerful childish imageries to me, and I think that's what they are. I think like you could say the world of storytelling, but no, I think it's more specific to that. I think it's Jack's childhood, and he's having to reach into that childhood to get the strength to go on to his journey. Because one of the things that's really interesting to me, we started this whole conversation laying the story at the feet of the hero's journey and talking about these steps that a hero goes along the way. And one of those is crossing the threshold, going into a new world, getting a new power out of that world, and returning home new, empowered, in order to affect change in the real world. And that is, in essence, what happens in this story. But the interesting thing to me is the talisman does not come from the territories, right? The talisman is in all worlds. It is like, and I believe, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but I believe there's a lot of flipping and melding of worlds there at the end. But I believe when Jack first holds on to the talisman, he is not in the territories. He is not in the Black Castle. He is in the Black Hotel the first time he grabs hold of the thing. And so it's not as if he has to go into this magical world of the territories, retrieve this object from it, and then return to our world. In fact, with the exception of the train ride through the Blasted Lands, he does most of his traveling in our world, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's not as if the territories is this place of power that he has to take a powerful object from, but they are a place of strength for him, and also a place of fear for him, which is what childhood can be. And I don't know, I think this works rather perfectly, actually, when you frame it this way.
I love it. As you were talking, I was realizing, like, yeah, that's it. because think about like what is Sloat's relationship to the territories? Well, it's complicated, and I don't know if I can articulate all of it, but basically, it's a sort of inappropriate lingering in childhood of a man who should have grown up by now. And Sloat, he's a selfish, bratty 2-year-old. We've said this before. Mm-hmm. You even pointed out toward last week, actually, that the finale is just them bickering at each other like children even younger than Jack's actual age. Frankly, Sloat is just such a child, and he's a man who's stuck in Arrested Development, and but being a grown man now, he's unable to just sort of enjoy the territories as a child would. He wants to exploit them. He wants to bring bring guns to the the satyrs and nymphs and werewolves and take over, which is like just deranged, and it's like that's what's bringing the sickness. So it's about growing up, and the villain, I mean, it's kind of perfect, actually. Like, this is perfect. It's a story about growing up, and the villain is a man who couldn't grow up, a man in Arrested Development.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you could say that he represents nostalgia, the exploitation of the feelings of the young. I mean, this actually this is all clicking together for me in a way that makes me just want to take back everything I said about the book not coming together in a real way. But the idea that, we talked about the exploitation and abuse of young boys throughout the course of the book.
Mm-hmm.
If Sloat represents that writ large because he wants to exploit and abuse the concept of childhood for his own personal gain. Like it's exactly that.
Yeah, right. And then there's the whole all boys are bad thing, mm-hmm. which is also like replace boys with just children or childhood. Yeah. Childhood is bad, and mm-hmm. A character who hates the very idea of childhood and wants to destroy it.
I think the thing that I like the most about this is I think by the end of the book, Jack has turned 13. There's that beautiful Mark Twain quote that caps off the book that talks about like this was the story of a young boy becoming a man. Like, so this is where it needs to stop. And the book never like outright says Jack's not going to go back into the territories after this. But like, am I wrong in getting the feeling that like he's probably not going to just be like spending his days flipping back and forth between the territories? Like, was that just me that got that feeling from the end of the way the story ended? Like, I just kind of felt like that kind of stuff he was done with now.
Yeah, I think the territories are one of the childish things that he is going to put away. Mm-hmm. I agree. He has no business there anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think we got to the bottom of it. Thanks, Complicated, for helping us with that. I guess at the conclusion of this, are you then confident in saying that the territories are not Midworld and Midworld is not the territories? It sounds like the answer to that is yes.
I think the relationship between the territories and Midworld is that the territories were a rather robust seed that was planted in Stephen King's head that then flowered into Midworld. But textually, I do not believe that within the world of the Dark Tower that, the territories are part of Midworld. I think that's the case. Yeah.
So, and then of course the question has to be, what in the sequel will change or update or do anything to that understanding?
Well, we have this notion that even within this book, that there's more than one other world. So sure. that in itself opens the door to the idea that like, okay, well then Midworld is out there somewhere.
Sure. All right. Let's talk about the Talisman a little bit more specifically. We talked about the territories. Now let's talk about the Talisman. We have Michelle Y here who asks, I would love if you spend a wee bit more time considering what the Talisman actually is within the Dark Tower world. You seem to hone in on equating the ball of light in the Black Hotel with the Dark Tower. However, I argue the Agincourt Hotel parallels the tower, and the Talisman is more akin to the entity at the top of the tower, the one calling Roland, the one Roland identifies as Gan's life force. The Grapefruit, Black 13, and the other glass balls crafted by Marilyn mimic the Talisman, and their colors are reflected in the rose window. I really want you to dig more into the wondrous white ball etched with the fine lines of latitude. Consider how Stephen King, Peter Straub describe it as both the nexus and the axle of all possible worlds. Is that the same? Whew, that's a lot. That's a lot to work with, Michelle. We'll do what we can here. Matt, what do you think? What are your first thoughts after reading that?
I still feel pretty strongly that the ball, the Talisman, is the axis. It is the Dark Tower. The same words are used to describe the Talisman as are used to describe the Dark Tower. Now, that being said, this is all metaphysical gobbledygook anyway. The idea, so the Dark Tower itself was kind of a living entity in a way that was that reminded me of the way that the talisman behaves. I mean, I can see your point here, because what we have in both cases is we have a big kind of dark, scary looking building that houses a force of power. But the thing is, the whole story was about the Dark Tower in a way that it was not really about the life force of Gan at the top of the tower.
Yeah, I guess I don't draw a specific distinction between Gan and the Dark Tower in my head. Those to me are basically the same thing. I mean, maybe not technically, but in all the ways that matter, kind of, yes. So yeah, I mean, I think that the Talisman is the tower in all the ways that matter. I think the Agincourt Hotel, you know, maybe is more comparable to the Field of Roses that surround the tower. You know, these things that, you know, very, very, very sharp thorns. So, I mean, I don't know. I think it's the thing that's interesting about this is like the talisman at the end of this book ceases to exist, right? It cracks open, it spills its juice in Jack's mom's mouth, it heals her, and then it disappears. And so obviously, like, it's not gone. Like, the tower didn't cease to exist. It just it's a metaphysical manifestation of a concept, and so it appears in certain forms to do certain things, and other forms to do other things. And so I think it's a living thing in the same way the tower is a living thing, you know, in that in some worlds it's a rose, in some worlds it's a big spooky tower surrounded by roses.
Yeah. One thing that just came to me is sort of also an answer to Complicated's question is like what the nature of the talisman specifically. I do think that the territories and this world that Jack lives in are twinned in an important sense. Like these two worlds are joined more tightly than like the world that Father Callahan comes from and the world that Eddie comes from.
Sure.
So
but like similar to the way like Keystone Earth and Midworld would be linked.
Yeah. And so thusly you're allowed to kind of have some special rules related to the talisman flipping between them and so forth.
Yeah. I do think it's a good point that, and when we kind of gestured toward, but maybe didn't talk enough about, is the similarities between the talisman and Marilyn's rainbow, right? We get these, you know, this is white. We have Black 13, which is basically the exact opposite of this. And then we have all the other colors of the rainbow, some of which we see reflected in the talisman itself. You know, it glows different colors. It changes colors to reflect different things. And so like the question is here, how do these talismans, for lack of a better term, relate to each other in any way? And I think the problem with trying to answer this question with any intelligence behind it is King is so nebulous about what Merlin's rainbow actually is. You know, like you can look it up in supplementary material, but like in the books proper, there's really no explanation of where these things came from and what they do and how they work. Like, obviously we're meant to believe they're connected to the tower in some ways because we see the rose window that has all the colors, and we see the way the colors of the balls relate to the beam guardians themselves. Like, these are all things that the books kind of draw for us, but not in any kind of concrete way where we can grab onto it and says, yes, Black 13 and the talisman are, you know, the cardinal opposites of each other. Are they? I don't know.
I mean, I kind of don't think so, because even the talisman turns black at a certain point when it's
sure.
You know, you could argue it's trying to make a point, but also I think that within its nature, you know, if it is the Dark Tower, if it is sort of everything, then within its nature is darkness and evil. Like this is sort of a I don't know, like it's sort of, to me, verges on the same stuff that King often talks about with religion, where it's like, you know, within the fullness of everything, there is a strain of evil. Again, also, I'm going to have to go to Lord of the Rings, where we have, you know, the god above all creates all of his kind of lesser angels, and one of them is like the angel of discord. Basically, it's Morgoth, but Morgoth's attempts to ruin the Song of Creation are just incorporated into the Song of Creation and basically add variety to it. And I honestly think that's kind of King's perspective about how the function that evil and discord serves within his world is like, well, this is just the necessary source of problems that leads to good drama and narrative.
Sure.
I kind of went down a rabbit hole there, but I think the point is, I think that I think Black 13 is indeed one element of the Dark Tower. It's not antithetical to it.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that white is kind of all colors combined, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that each and every one of these I keep wanting to call them talismans, and I realize every one of these baubles comes from the talisman, which is the tower. So like it all comes from the same place, certainly. And I mean, Black 13 is unique in that regard. It always has been. But yeah, I mean, it all comes. I mean, that is it is evil, right? It is evil. It is bad. But if the tower is the center of everything, then it has to be part of it as well. You're totally right. Yeah. So I don't know if we answered that question, Michelle, but we at least talked about it for a little bit of time. But I think the one thing I love just the idea of like that they describe it as both the nexus and the axle of all possible worlds. Is that different enough to matter, those two words? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's more just an evolution of the way that King chose to think about it.
Yeah, sure. Plus, like, I don't know. Whenever I think of Nexus, I think of something with a lot of spokes coming out of it. So, anyway,
yeah, I guess I don't really. What does Nexus actually mean? That's one of those words where I've only I at this point I use it in terms of like analogies to other things.
Yeah, I mean, here's my problem is I think the first time I heard the word Nexus was when I was playing the game EverQuest, and it was a big room that was at the center of everything that took you to everywhere else. And so I just use Nexus and Axle kind of interchangeably. I think they work basically interchangeably. Like a Nexus is just a connection of two or more things, right? It's just a connecting point of things. And that's kind of what an Axle is as well. I
mean, an axle, everything rotates around an axle, and I think the thing about the Dark Tower specifically is like everything narratively rotates around the Dark Tower. It doesn't literally rotate around the Dark Tower, but it is the driving force of creation. That's what he means by axis or axle or whatever.
I do think it would be correct in saying that the Dark Tower is both the axle of all possible worlds and the nexus of all possible worlds simultaneously.
Sure.
I think that's right. And if that's true for the tower, it's true for the talisman as well.
Yeah, I agree.
I really just like don't want I don't want to I think the reason why, Michelle, overall I'm like resisting the idea of drawing an entity out of the tower itself is because it complicates the lore to me to a place where I just completely lose it. And so like I'm just sticking to this idea that the tower and Gan are one and the same, and also the talisman is just the tower. It is, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it because it makes it digestible for me.
Yeah. I think that's fine, Scott. I think that's fine.
All right, let's move into some general, more Dark Tower connection conversation with the talisman. So we have a question here from Like a Fox. You want to read that one?
Like a Fox says, the talisman is pretty different from the other books we've read for season 2. Before it, we were usually exploring characters as they appeared in works outside of the Dark Tower series, like Ted Brodigan, Randall Flagg, Father Callahan, etc. The talisman, by comparison, hasn't featured any characters that appear in the series, or even direct appearances of things like Loman or the Tower. Instead, we get a bunch of overlapping themes, we get some very similar plot beats, and we even get some similar sounding descriptions when you compare the talisman to the rose or the tower. I guess that's a long preamble for the question, what kind of effect has the talisman had on your understanding overall of the world of the Dark Tower? has it had a different impact because it's not focusing on expanding our understanding of a specific character?
I think that's a question for you overall, Matt. So I'll let you start.
Well, yeah, I'll go first. I'll just say this helped me understand sort of where King is coming from with a lot of these ideas. I think the most succinct way of putting it is what I said previously, which is that this serves as a sort of rough draft or template for the Dark Tower. Obviously, a ton of the plot and thematic ideas were laid down here, and then I think King thought about them for a long time, and they wormed their way into his conceptions of his other stories.
Mm-hmm.
And as he began to do his unified world, where he would put connections between stories, I think he always had the territories and the Talisman in the back of his mind as maybe if you'd asked him in 1986, he would have said, yeah, the territories are the hub of my of my story world. And then maybe at some point he changed his mind and he said, no, I want it to be bigger, I want it to be different, I want it to be weirder, I want there to be a gunslinger, and then it grew from there. So I think this got me more understanding Stephen King and where he came from, but obviously less understanding specifically like the specific fictional universe of the Dark Tower.
Yeah, but I don't think we need more understanding of the specific fictional universe of the Dark Tower. Because, I mean, my answer to this question is, I think we've talked about this before, but I love when the Tower connections are less specific and more vague. And that's one of the reasons I love how this book relates to the Dark Tower, because it kind of shows the breadth and depth of this world and the tower itself. That there is this other world that exists out here, and there's this whole other thing, the Talisman, that exists that is also representing the tower, and other people are struggling to protect it or use it or capture it or destroy it. And it just makes the world feel bigger to me in a way that feels natural and powerful. But I don't need a specific, like, I'm very, like, Midworld didn't necessarily exist when this book was written, so like there could not have been a line in this book where it says this was Midworld. Look, there's Roland in the distance. Do you see him? There he is. There's a specific reference here or there. Like, I am very thankful this doesn't have any of those things, and I love that it just kind of expands the world in a way that makes sense to me. Like, we've talked about how a lot of this is confusing, and I think we've worked through a lot of it today, but I don't know, like, just the idea that, oh yeah, well, there's in this world, the Talisman, or the tower, is a talisman, and it needs Jack's help, and so he helps it, and so it gives Jack a gift, and then it lets Jack go because he lets it go. And that moves into actually what our next question is going to be about. But I think that's important to the whole thing too. So it is a growth of the world to me in a way that feels very, very natural, and it works.
Sure. Yeah, I like that. Maybe as we read Black House, I will yet again change my perspective on this book.
Yeah, I mean, without any spoilers for Black House specifically, this is definitely a conversation we're going to have to revisit after we read that book.
Yeah, well, because what occurs to me, of course, is that at any point King can retroactively just say, and then, Father Callahan opened the door onto the territories, like very, very easily retcon, if that's the right term here in this context, and just say, yeah, it's definitely all just exactly the same. Yeah, we'll see where things go.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you actually know when Black House was written.
No,
it's so 2001 is when that book came out.
Okay.
So
wow.
Years later. There's been a lot of Dark Tower books that happened between those two things. So King's understanding of his universe has grown a lot between these two novels, for sure.
Okay. Well, yeah, fantastic. That leads me in certain directions then.
Okay. Along this line, we have Jake D, who asks, although the Talisman has some cyclical structure to it, I noticed that this quest for the Dark Tower, aka the Talisman, didn't end with the protagonist having to repeat the entire quest again. Is it possible that Jack managed to do what Roland hasn't been able to do yet? If the Talisman is essentially the Dark Tower, and we know that Ka is a wheel, are we reading the final turn of the wheel for Jack? I can see a version of the story in which Jack does not let go of the Talisman as he does at the end of the book, and the Talisman boots Jack back to the beach, staring out at the water, quest forgotten, with the vague memory of the Talisman saying, perhaps this time, if you stand, if you are true. If this is true, what decision or point in Jack's story do you think would have triggered a reset? Or is the cyclical nature of the Tower quest unique in Roland's case? Furthermore, if Jack is the only one who can retrieve the Talisman, as Roland was the only one who could enter the Dark Tower, does this mean that Roland is also singular in all worlds and doesn't have a twinner? A lot of questions there, Matt. Let's take the first one. Why is Jake is asking the question, and that threw me off. Why is Jack not trapped in an eternal cycle of hell?
Well, I think as we said a bit ago, it's a story about growing up, and it's a story about successfully growing up. It's not a tragedy. So he goes through the trials and becomes a man and grows up, and he's done. And that is what this story is.
Yeah.
Roland is a very, very different character with very different struggles, and his story is not about growing up. His story is about obsession, really, and that's just requires totally different considerations and outcomes. So.
Yeah, and I think to answer your kind of other question, like what is his decision point? I think the point that stuck out to me the most this time was, I don't want to be a god. I just want to save my mother. The idea that this is the thing he's been questing for the entire time. He gets his hands on it, and then he is able to freely let it go is the decision point, which is interesting because, we talked about this with Roland, that his failure point happens pretty early in his quest, all things considered, right? His failure point is the decision to let Jake fall. Is kind of the moment that he damns himself. And so it is interesting that Roland's moment happens so early in his quest, and Jack's moment happens very near the end of his, where he successfully lets go of the thing. And I do think, I do see those as related to each other in a certain way, that, you're absolutely right that this is a story about growing up, and he successfully grows up by like letting go of the thing that can represent childhood in a certain way. Like if the territory is his childhood, then you could also, kind of squint at the Talisman itself and say, this is a bauble, a talisman of childhood. And you allow it to go away. You allow it to leave you. You move on beyond that. I've loved being a kid. Being a kid is great. It's good fun, but you got to grow up. You got to leave that stuff behind. And it doesn't mean that you can't have appreciation for it, but to have obsession of it, like Morgan Sloat does, is ultimately destructive. And to obsess over it like Roland is with his personal tower is ultimately destructive. And Jack does not need to learn that lesson. He gets tested on it and passes right away. And the tower's like, sweet, I like you, kid. Let's go.
Yeah. Right. And his reward is to literally just go back to his normal life. Right. He doesn't become a god. He doesn't become empowered. I do think it's interesting that Sloat, that he didn't, as I pointed out before, like it seems more like he's being punted away than it is like he's being killed. And it tickles me to imagine that like Sloat is being pushed back to the beginning of his journey to try again.
Oh, he goes back to when he first met Phil Sawyer in college.
Yeah,
and has to do all that over again.
He has the chance to stand. Maybe Sloat can be redeemed yet. Huh?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I do think like this is a quest that's always been very specific to Roland Deschain himself, right? But I do love this idea of a world in which every single human being that exists in it has a chance to fix their greatest mistakes,
Yeah.
There is something obviously horrifying about the fact that you have to relive these moments again and again and again. But there's also something very calming about the fact that you get to fix the thing that you fucked up, the worst thing you've ever done in your life. You get to fix that. I think that's very reassuring to me as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of a beautiful sort of cosmology, actually.
Yeah.
If the idea that like the reason why there are infinite worlds in the Dark Tower universe, could it be literally because everyone is always given a chance to fix their mistakes?
Yeah.
That is why there are infinite worlds. It's not just like a base feature of reality. It's not that there are, it's not Everett quantum mechanics where every single quantum event causes a new universe. It's specifically people doing wrongs that they ought to have done differently that causes the world to fork into two worlds. Like that's a cool idea. I never thought of that. I don't know if there's any other support for that, but man, that's a fun idea, actually.
One of the most fun things about the Dark Tower for me is that because the rules of the world are so not fleshed out, I don't think there's any specific support for what you just said, but there's also nothing that says it's wrong.
Uh-huh.
And ergo, it can be your truth and no one can have a problem with that. So yeah, I accept it. I like it. It's great.
Awesome.
I think the final question Jake asked is, does that mean Roland is also singular in all worlds and doesn't have a twinner? I think the answer to that has to be yes, right? Roland Deschain is Roland Deschain. There is no twinner. There's no other. It's just this man.
I think one of the features of Midworld is that the twinner thing doesn't work quite the same way there. And Roland specifically, I think, is unique. Yeah. So I agree.
I'm trying to see if I disagree with that in any way. I don't think so.
Well, yeah. So like there is the thing where like people's names pop up, but
yeah.
I don't think the idea there is that there are twinners. Man, my memory has gotten real vague. But no, I just feel like the answer is clearly no. Roland is singular.
Yeah. All right, Matt, moving on to the next question.
All right. So here we have Bent Westward says, what in your minds is the most indisputable evidence for the Talisman being a Dark Tower affiliated novel? In my mind, there were loose connections to be seen if we squinted hard enough, but nowhere near anything else that has been in season 2 so far. It is to the point where I question whether it is the one that has helped people, and perhaps even King retcon anything with mild supernatural content to be Dark Tower adjacent. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it, but I just didn't see any smoking guns.
I think it's that the Talisman is described in the exact same way the Dark Tower is. That's my smoking gun.
Yeah, I mean, we have the feature of there being multiple worlds that you can move between. One of them being a fantasy world, like Midworld. We have what you just said. I mean, that is to me enough, and then on top of that, you point out all of the narrative similarities, and then depending on how you want to think about that, to me that says like, well, the Dark Tower is a story about story. It is a story about narrative, and so when you have a story that is narratively mirroring the Dark Tower, to me that says that it's connected. Yeah, maybe that's a bit hand wavy, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Bent Westward's point and to like a Fox's point before them, this is an anomaly in the books we've covered so far, right? That there is no direct, clear, absolute reference. Like no one in this book says the words Dark Tower, which is not true in like basically almost every other book we've read so far for season 2. But yeah, I mean, I think the connections here are much more loose, and I also think we're building to something in the next book that we'll talk about when we get there as well.
And we also have the white, so even though we don't have the Dark Tower, we have the white.
That is true.
And there was no Dark Tower in Salem's Lot, but there was the white, So.
Yep.
And then the second part of Bent Westward's question was, what's with all the hate for Temple of Doom? It is perhaps one of the finest action adventures of all time. In fact, I would argue that Indy's quest to recover the Shankara stones, a direct representation of the beams, free the slave children, the breakers, alongside his faithful sidekick Short Round, Jake, and even the loyal but mischievous elephant, Oi, represent one of the finest trips to the tower and back that Indy ever embarked upon. You just need to ignore Susanna's constant screaming.
My response to this is, when is the last time you watched Temple of Doom? Watch it again and come back to me and tell me that it's really that good of a movie.
I think I feel like much like this novel, Temple of Doom is a very uneven movie where like there's like chunks of it that are quite good. There's chunks of it where you're like, yeah, this is Spielberg doing Spielberg fun action, but it's just so like, oh, now there's a guy ripping a guy's heart out. And then the whole beginning sequence is just
the opening of that movie is the wildest fucking thing I've ever seen. Indiana Jones, first of all, it opens on a fucking 5-minute dance number. What is happening?
Mm-hmm.
And then Indiana Jones is like doing a diamond deal with the Yakuza. It's fucking crazy.
You know,
and then he kills everybody.
Yeah.
At least in the other movies, like he's killing Nazis, and so you're like, yeah, they're Nazis. I'm for it. In this, it's just like, are these people bad? And like, I guess they are.
Does this have anything to do with archaeology, or is he just James Bond now?
I don't know. He fucking takes a kebab skewer, a flaming kebab skewer, and like pierces someone in the heart with it. Oh, what a crazy ass movie. It's not very good.
I always just forget about that whole part of the movie because it's nonsense.
It's total nonsense. Yeah. That's why I'm harsh around Temple of Doom. Look, and there obviously are parts that I love of it, for sure. Like I think like the ripping the guy's heart out thing like fucked me up in amazing ways when I was a kid. The minecart race stuff is awesome, as it always is, as anything that ever puts minecart chase scenes in it. I thought the voodoo doll stuff was, in retrospect, incredibly random and has nothing to do with the culture that it's representing at all. But I thought that was kind of terrifying and cool when I was a kid.
It literally never occurred to me until this moment that the voodoo doll stuff makes no sense in India. But okay.
Nothing. I don't think there's anything representing India in that entire fucking movie.
Fair point.
Which is why they've completely like barred. I don't think it's allowed. That movie's allowed to be played in India. Really? I think they hate it, and understandably, it is incredibly cruel to that entire country and its people.
Okay.
All right. Speaking of Steven Spielberg, though, you mentioned Steven Spielberg, Matt, and so now we're going to move on to the next phase of our discussion, which is about adapting the Talisman. So I think we covered this at the beginning of the podcast, but I'll repeat it for those that couldn't remember. Steven Spielberg read the manuscript for the Talisman 2 years before it came out, because I guess that's just what you get to do when you're Steven Spielberg. So before the book was even published, he bought the rights for the film into perpetuity. So he will have the rights for as long as he wants to have the rights. And he has been trying to make a Talisman movie basically since 1982. This, by the way, Matt, is why Stephen King doesn't sell rights this way anymore. He doesn't ever allow any kind of adaptation rights to be into perpetuity. He always has a time limit on them. He says you make the movie within X amount of years or you lose the rights. He doesn't do those deals anymore, which is smart because Steven Spielberg has just been holding on to these things for 40 years.
40 years trying to get the movie made. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right, Steven.
So the last news we heard about an adaptation, though, is back in May of 2021. It was announced that Spielberg was working with the Duffer Brothers, who you folks probably know as the creators of Netflix's Stranger Things, to develop a Netflix series based on the Talisman. We have not heard a single thing since this announcement, and with Netflix's valuation tanking in the last couple of weeks, I don't know if this is still going to happen, but it does bring us to one of our listeners' questions and a good conversation to be had, I think, which is, what about adapting the Talisman? So Richard G asks, I hope I'm remembering correctly, but I think you guys were talking about someone having the rights to make a film adaptation of the Talisman. Yes, Mr. Spielberg. I've been thinking about it so much through the read, and I can't get my head around how it would work. Some truly horrible things happened to Jack and Richard, and I feel like reading them is one thing, but watching would be completely something else. Like there would be a scene where these 12-year-olds are mowing down enemies with Uzis. Imagine watching that. It'd be like watching Home Alone, but Kevin has, an Uzi. just interested in your opinion on adaptation. If you think it would work, who do you think its target audience would be? This is a great question, actually. And I am of the opinion that this book, ironically, would be easier to adapt than a lot of other King works, including The Dark Tower itself.
Okay. I can sort of see a something in the vicinity of Stranger Things, the tonal and sort of like can't you visualize like the way they shoot Stranger Things?
Yes,
but it's this movie instead, or it's this book instead.
Yeah. I think there would have to be changes made to some of the details of some of the darker stuff in the book for sure, but I think you could navigate around those pretty easily.
Yeah, right. I mean, certain things they might just literally change. Like, in the end, we talked about the idea that Wolf murders like 15 innocent boys, and then at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't know if that mattered, if you know what I mean. Like, like we never mentioned it again. It didn't seem to have any real impact. Like, so that's the kind of thing where you might just say, okay, well, Wolf mauls a couple of people who deserve it, and then we just kind of move on. And then the Uzi stuff, like, I kind of feel like the Uzi stuff would actually be something they'd just leave out, because number one, I really don't think a 12-year-old can physically fire an Uzi. Like, it's a ridiculous weapon, actually.
I mean, you change the weapons, or you just make it so instead of like fighting them in a gunfight, they just detonate the train bomb, and we just see a big explosion plume and don't see any body parts fly apart or anything. Like, there's ways to get around that very easily. Yeah. But I mean, look, Stranger Things is a dark show. Dark shit happens in that show. Yeah. And I think that, to answer your question on target audience, Richard, I think that's the tone that they would be going for. I mean, I think that's why Spielberg went to the Duffers, as he saw Stranger Things and said, I think this tone would work for the Talisman. And to be honest with you, I think he's right. I Stranger Things is not my favorite show. I really enjoyed the first season and really haven't liked it much since then. But I do think it fits, and not just because it's about kids and it's doing this 80s Amblin type of nostalgia thing. I think it fits this kind of mixture between darkly, supernaturally scary, but also wonder and adventure and friendship and all these important things that the Talisman is ticking off. Like, I can see, you're absolutely right that when I close my eyes, I can see a Stranger Things-esque Talisman movie or series very, very clearly.
Yeah. I think a series is the way to do it, by the way. I don't think a movie would work for this. I think it's going to be, a one season mini series or whatever.
And it does offer the opportunity to take a story that we've talked about is, kind of disjointed, has wonderful set pieces, but doesn't really come together, and cut out the fat a little bit and really refine it to become one thing. You take two authors' vision in a book, and then you take those two authors and you adapt it into a story, and you could tell one story. You could kind of, there's a chance of taking this thing and quote unquote fixing the problems we had with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Paring it down to one simple through line. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that opportunity exists. I hope it happens. I'm not holding on to a lot of hope here at the moment. Netflix is not doing very well. It's not that I think Netflix is going to go bankrupt. They'll be fine. It's just that I don't know if this is the type of thing that they're going to want to make anymore. I think 5 years ago, Netflix would have spent gobbles of money on this thing. Yeah. And I don't know if they're going to be willing to do that anymore.
Well, maybe somebody else will, though. Maybe, the Duffer Brothers can do it outside of Netflix.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the last season of Stranger Things, right? That's coming out this year. So I think they're gonna. I don't know if they have a overall deal with Netflix to develop other stuff there, but I don't know. We'll see. It is not good when there's a big push, a big news article coming out about something, and then you just don't hear anything about it for over a year. Not usually a good sign, but who knows in the world we live in today.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah. All right. Now we're going to move into some random questions, Matt. Just some random off the cuff questions that don't really relate to the Talisman specifically. You want to start this off?
Sure. So Steve L says, if there was a Stephen King Olympics, what would be the top 10 competitors?
Competitions.
Competitions. Sorry.
So like instead of like marathon running, it would be like marathon writing. Right.
Okay. All right. That's good. I was taking it a different way. I was thinking like marathon, except whoever finishes last gets shot.
Oh, I see. So you're going to take the existing sports in the Olympics and just kingify them instead of just coming up with entirely new sports. Okay.
Or just some horrible ordeal and then turn it into a sport. Oh yeah, gunslinging. There you go.
Yeah.
You got to shoot. You got 12 bullets. You got to shoot 12 targets in less than 2 seconds.
And then if you fail, you go west.
If you fail, you go west. Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the events would obviously be, you watch your youngest son hang off the edge of a cliff, and the competition is let him go? Question mark.
Yeah. Falconry, obviously.
Obviously, there would definitely be like a Billy Bumbler, like Best in Show, but for Billy Bumblers.
Yeah, and you have to tell them to do stuff, and they do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's.
I mean, discus is pretty clear.
Discus,
there.
Absolutely.
We're going mostly with Dark Tower themed stuff here, but that makes sense for us, I think.
I think it does. Steak pounding. We could just throw that in there.
Steak pounding. What would the competition be, Matt?
Oh, you just gotta
most vampires slain in 60 seconds.
No. You got a steak and you got to pound it into like the ground or something, and whoever pounds theirs all the way into the ground first wins. That's competitive steak pounding.
Interesting. I like it. This is a much bigger steak than I had envisioned, but I can see it now.
Yeah.
Do we have any more we can think of? We can just keep going.
I don't know.
I think obviously one of them is competitive staying awakeism.
Competitive staying awakeism. Yeah.
Yeah. Whoever can stay awake the longest. Or is it whoever can stay awake the longest, or whoever achieves seeing the colors fastest wins?
Yeah. I think the latter. Yeah.
The first time you see a little bald doctor, that's gold medal, baby.
That's I love it.
We could keep going.
Yeah.
Let's turn this around. Audience, what other ones can you come up with? What are some good competitions in the Stephen King Olympics?
I have two more that I'm not even going to say because I want to give everybody a chance. All right. Steve then goes on to say, why do horror fans like the bad guys? Like tattoos or shirts with it or Freddy Krueger on it, they're promoting it. One guess is because the heroes are recognizable, so they put the heroes are recognizable, so they put the bad guys out there. The other guess is that something inside them resonates with the evil, so they kind of like the bad guys. What do you think? So why do people wear a it clown, Pennywise clown T-shirt instead of a T-shirt with a boring guy?
I think you just answered it there.
I think I did.
I mean the villains are the ones with the iconography, right? Like,
they're cool. Is the thing?
They're cool. Yeah.
I mean, it just is a fact about humans that we think bad is cool in some way, right?
Yeah, especially when we get to celebrate it with no repercussions, right? Like, you don't have to feel bad about Jason Voorhees murdering someone in a movie because it's not real. So like it's cool to wear a Jason shirt, or like Freddy Krueger is scary. And I think like the things that scare us also, titillate us in a certain way. And we like, and I mean, it's there, no one like, can you close your eyes and think of one actor from Friday the 13th? Now I can, because I've seen those movies a lot, but you can't.
No. Well, there's nothing. I mean, even let's take a much more mundane example. You could have a Hannibal Lecter T-shirt, and everybody knows they're not going to say, "Why is Anthony Hopkins on your T-shirt?" They're gonna, it's gonna be the pose of him with his head down, looking looking up, at that angle, and they're going to know that that's Hannibal Lecter. Whereas if you show Clarice from that movie, they might actually just say, "Why is Jodie Foster on your T-shirt?" Because
Matt, I want to start a series of T-shirts that are just the non-iconic villain characters on T-shirts. Like I want I want Clarice on a T-shirt. I want gosh, I just blanked on every this is the problem, Matt. This is the problem. I want Jamie Lee Curtis on a T-shirt. I want
instead of Patrick Bateman, it's Paul Allen.
It's perfect. This will sell. I want Nancy from A Nightmare on Elm Street on a T-shirt, and everyone's gonna be like, "Oh, Nancy Thomas, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, exactly." It's probably already a thing, but let's.
Yeah, you know what doesn't work with this though is saying like instead of Darth Vader, put blank, and the reason is that now there's like a show about every single Star Wars character. So
yeah. Well, I mean, but that's that's interesting because obviously, yes, Darth Vader is like the iconic bad guy, right? And he's on Infinity shirts, but like Luke Skywalker is also iconic.
Yes.
And he's on a shit ton of shirts too. So like there are certain series, and I think to Steve's point, horror seems to do this more often, that the good guys are so interchangeable that we would never put them on a shirt.
Yeah.
Whereas the bad guys, of course we would.
And I think it's horror specifically because horror is generally about us. So it's supposed to be about normal, boring people like us with, normal haircuts, who wear normal clothes, have nothing iconic at all about their appearance. Whereas other genres, everything about them can be iconic.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right, next we have Kuchi who asks us, are you two going to cover Gwendy's adventure in the future? I recently finished the trilogies, and it would be a blast to listen to how you both think about it. That's a good question. And first of all, I want to say sorry for butchering your name, which I'm sure I did. My apologies. But, to be honest with you folks, I consider myself a constant reader. I've read just about every Stephen King novel. The Gwendy books I've never read them. I never read a single one of them. So I have it on my slate to read all three of those books later this year. And once I read those and see, how directly related to the tower and how much I think we'd have to say about them, I will make a decision on whether we're going to cover them. The Dark Tower is in the cover of the third book, so it seems like it's pretty related, but I don't know.
Cool. I don't know anything about that. So, all right. Whackamack98 says, for the mailbag question, when I was younger, I read Black House for the first time without knowing it was a sequel and only went back to the Talisman much later. Have you ever jumped into a series of any kind, books, TV, games, whatever, partway through? If so, how did it affect your perception of characters or events? Did you ever go backwards and start at the beginning? And how did your foreknowledge color the experience?
This is such a good question, and I'm so mad that I don't think I have a good answer for it.
So I think this has happened to me more than once, but the answer that jumps to my mind is I was with my family and we turned on the TV and we were watching this show. I don't even think we knew what show we were watching. Rather than drag the story out, it was the X-Files. And it was the episode where they're in that like South Pole ice station that was sort of a ripoff of The Thing. But we didn't know who the main characters were. And so it was incredibly tense because we had no idea who was safe and who was going to die. It was really, really quite an experience. It was quite an episode of TV, not knowing that you were watching an episode of TV where two of the characters were just definitely going to be fine no matter what. That actually improved the experience, thinking that, not even knowing who Mulder and Scully were and not knowing that they were definitely not going to die.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm sure I've done this, but I don't have any distinct memories of it. I think one interesting thing, I don't know, I feel like this is something that is probably not going to happen as much anymore. I feel like a lot of this comes from what you just described. In the olden days, you would turn on the TV and you just start watching whatever's on the TV because, if you didn't have a TV guide to tell you what the thing was, you just didn't know what it was. And B, there weren't infinity channels and literally anything you ever wanted to watch anywhere ever. And also just like the idea that the internet exists, so you can like pick up a book and very easily say, is this book a sequel to another book? And it will just tell you that immediately. Yes, it is. Go read that one first. I wonder if this is a kind of going to be a lost experience, because I do think it provides something pretty unique when it does happen. I think my dad said that he read The Drawing of the Three before he read The Gunslinger. I think just because he didn't know, he just saw this book and said interesting, and so he read it. And I've heard that story from other people before as well. So I don't know. I think it certainly will change how you experience a thing. I'm certain that I've done it because I used to just like pick up books my dad had lying around and read them, and not knowing if it was part of my dad reads all like crazy amount of sci-fi books, and I would just pick some up, not knowing if it had anything to do with anything. I just read it.
Yeah. I'm thinking of this one book series that I read where like he wrote the books out of order. And so there's not even like, you can read the books in chronological order, or you can read the books in publication order. And there's not really a correct way because they're not really continuous in the normal sense. I don't know, that's an exception.
I feel like TV, like you used to be able to do this, and TV was kind of designed. Like I certainly did not ever watch any episode of Star Trek in the correct order.
I was just going to say Star Trek, where like I don't, I think they intentionally like didn't want to show you season 1 episodes anymore past a certain point because they were terrible. So you were never really gonna, but it didn't matter. Like it wasn't that kind of show.
One of the weirdest things to me is I just, last year did my complete watch of the original series. And one of the weirdest things to me was watching the pilot episode of Star Trek, because I don't know, I think I'm so ingrained in modern television that I expected it to be an episode where very succinctly and clearly we are introduced to all our characters. And it just doesn't do that. It just starts and is like, here we go. We're on a mission, and you'll just kind of, I guess, meet them as we go. And that's just what it does. It's so fascinating. I think we just don't make TV like that anymore. And even the Next Generation kind of does that. It does it to a lesser extent, because like the inciting incident of the Next Generation is Picard is the new captain of the Enterprise. And so he's joining the ship. And so we kind of get to meet the crew as he does. So it's a little different, but it's like, it was so, shows in the 60s just don't operate the way we do things at all anymore. Right.
It's also interesting how it seems like they wanted Picard to be like really stuck up and unlikable, and then eventually they kind of changed their mind.
I think they envisioned an arc for him where he was going to soften up over time, and they kind of just realized that they needed to speed that up because he was just kind of unlikable. Yeah. Like he's just a piece of shit to Wesley Crusher. For like the first 4 episodes, he's just a nasty asshole to him. Yeah, he's like, no, I hate there's children on the show. Children, I hate children. No children on the bridge. Rawr. Yeah, and they quickly kind of just walked that back.
Yeah, they just made him a lot more human pretty quickly. Yeah,
for sure. Next, I think this one's yours.
Yep. Okay, Walking Hard Case says thoughts on Jack's appearance in Tommyknockers. I hope you guys can discuss it because it's barely more than a cameo. Curious what you think.
So Matt doesn't know what this means.
Nope.
But so in the book, The Tommyknockers, which came out in, I believe, 1988. Don't quote me on that. A character is really drunk, and he wakes up on a beach called Arcadia Beach, and he sees a boy there, and the boy's name is Jack, and this is obviously supposed to be Jack. But here's the interesting part, Matt. The book came out in 1988, takes place in 1988. Talisman takes place in 1982. That's like 6 years difference. And he was 13. So either it's just an old drunk man that's describing a 19, 20-year-old as a boy, or something wacky's going on here.
Yeah, it's time travel, man. It's Dark Tower.
But
it's no fucking rules with time. Time can do whatever it wants in the Dark Tower. We've established this many times.
I mean, it's so obviously Jack, and it's just a fun little like throwaway cameo thing, like you've seen in some other stuff.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think nothing about this.
Next, we have the Grokken dude who says, I will preface this question with a statement so as not to alarm you. I am a fan of your periodical 2 minutes of hate for anime and tend to stay away from the medium as well. Whew. That being said, on the rare occasions where you guys do watch anime for Doof Media or Patreon episodes, do you prefer subs or dubs? I only ask because I am largely indifferent, but it seems to be a divisive hill to die on within that community. I assume that either way, your answer will incur some form of wrath. Call it my inner Loki, but I like starting fires. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I prefer subs. I think generally the Japanese voice acting is closer to matching the intention behind the tone and the vibe of what anime is trying to do. Mm-hmm. Americans, we just can't do that. We just can't do it. We just can't match the right vibe. And I'm sure there's some really great dubbed anime out there, but I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, I think broadly, and this is not just anime, but like overall, I think the best way to watch something that is in another language is in the language it was created in, with subtitles. However, I think anime fans get way too bent out of shape about this thing. Like, the only 1-star review we have on our other podcast is because someone was really, really mad that when I watched Death Note, I watched it dubbed and not subbed. And I don't think I suddenly would have liked that show if I had listened to it in Japanese. Like, it was just a choice I made in the moment because A, when I clicked play on Netflix, that's what came up and I was too lazy to change it. And B, it was very difficult to give that show my entire attention because I was not enjoying it. And so having to not be able to do something else while I was watching it would have just destroyed me. I think I was using a row machine a lot at that time, and I think I watched like that entire thing while on a row machine. And like, if I had to have read it the entire time, I would have gone insane.
That's why you hate it, because you were rowing the whole time.
So, overall, it's better to watch something subtitled than it is to watch it dubbed. However, people need to chill out about this thing. Do what you want. Do what the hell you want, and don't let people bully you about the way you watch stuff. There's a lot of different reasons for why a person would choose to do dubs over subs, and it's a stupid thing to get upset about, in my opinion.
The last book I read with my eyeballs was like a year ago. I just audiobook all the time, and I mean, nobody ever judges me for that, but I see it as being a similar thing where it's really a rather different way of consuming it, but is it? Yeah, I don't know. I think they're I don't know. They're different. I like hearing the original language. I think I just value that. I do wonder if like one of the reasons people get so like into anime isn't literally because it's one of the few occasions in your life when you have to focus on something to the exclusion of everything else. And then you decide retroactively that it must be because it was super great and awesome and nothing else is this good, when it's actually just because you're having to read it, which means you're paying more attention to it than you usually pay attention to normal movies.
That is very possible.
Anyway.
I continue to look for reasons why people would like anime. So if that's one of them, then I will happily accept it.
Yeah. So the reason you should have watched the sub of Death Note is basically that you would have sunk cost fallacied yourself into liking it.
I don't know a lot of things in life, Matt, but I can guarantee you with 100% certainty that watching that thing in Japanese would not have suddenly made me enjoy it. There's no way ever that would have happened ever.
Okay.
No.
Right.
As a terrible show. I hated it.
I'm gonna find the level of the tower where you watch the subs.
Just fucking boring. Just
Death Note's very good, everyone. Don't listen to him. Anyway.
Although the The dubbed version did give me my favorite line, which is when he describes eating a potato chip in very absurd detail.
See, I mean, that's what I mean, though, is like you just can't. It just comes off as goofy when an American voice.
It comes off as goofy because it's a goofy ass thing to say, Matt.
Sure.
Whether it's in Japanese or English, but it's stupid.
But you just have to go with it.
Anyway, let's not talk about anime anymore right now. Let's move on to some Black House speculation, Matt. We had a couple people ask us questions about Black House. We had Like a Fox, who asked an earlier question. We also had AL84001, who said, give us some general predictions for Black House, Matt. Thoughts on what the titular object is? Does the story pick up soon after the Talisman or jump forward in time? Will we see any familiar characters? How many times will the phrase right here and now appear, etc.? So just lay it out for us, Matt. What do you think is going to happen in Black House?
I think there's going to be a haunted house or evil house.
Is it going to be black?
It might be black in color. I think that we will see some of our characters, but I don't think we will see Jack.
Okay. So what other characters? If not Jack, then who?
Maybe Richard. Maybe some random side characters whose names are escaping me right now, who don't really matter. But it would be fun to see them again because King likes to do callbacks.
Okay.
Because if you're going to call it a sequel, here's the thing: if you're going to call it a sequel, it's got to have some continuity, right?
Sure.
I mean, it may even have Jack. I'm not going to completely write that off. I would just say I felt like we wrapped up Jack. Like that felt kind of like it, you know. Mm-hmm. I don't really know what the plot's going to be because, like, you know, we did the whole saving the world coming of age story in this book. I kind of doubt we're going to do a similar plot arc in this next one. I think it might have, I don't know. Like, there's only so many things you can do with like a haunted house story. So, but it's not. I'm probably presuming too much by saying it's a haunted house story. These are my ramblings. Do with them as you will. I have no further thoughts.
Where do you think it's going to take place?
Maine.
When do you think it's going to take place?
1984. No, 1988. No. 2001.
Okay. I'm trying to think of other targeted questions I could ask here that don't spoil anything. How will the Dark Tower relate to it?
I feel like I have no idea. I'm reminded of the evil house that Jake goes to, and it ends up sort of being a doorway into Midworld.
Sure.
Are all evil houses doorways into Midworld? Is that the connection? Is the Black House does the Black House have a doorway into Midworld? Is that key to the plot?
Did the Marston House have a doorway into Midworld?
Well, not. I mean, maybe. We don't know that it didn't.
This is very fun, folks. I'm enjoying this very much. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, that's all I got.
You didn't answer the final question, which is how many times will the phrase right here and now appear?
Probably 0, unfortunately.
Do you think, we talked about the Talisman as a Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer, but also Odyssey, Hero's Journey type adventure story. Will Black House fit in with that, or will it be a different type of book?
I feel like it has to be a different type because, again, if it's a sequel, almost whether or not we're jumping forward in time by 20 years, our characters can't be doing coming of age again. You already did the coming of age. You did it. You got to have a different arc shape. Maybe they're whatever characters we're talking about here. Maybe they're in their 30s now and they're just they're struggling, they're, I don't know, classic king plot, struggling with addiction or something, and in a really down place in their life, and et cetera. Like that's a more, it becomes a redemption story, rather than a coming of age story.
But you failed to consider Jack Jr.
Could be Jack Jr. Could be Jack Jr. Could always be Jack Jr. That's true. I don't feel like it's going to be Jack Jr. though.
Okay. Well, one way or another, we will find out over the next few weeks, because next week we are beginning Stephen King and Peter Straub's Black House. Matt, this is going to be another lengthy time spent with a book. We're going to be doing this book over the course of 10 episodes as compared to our 12 with the Talisman. So it is a bit of a shorter book, but it will be a long time. We're going to be through with this book right around July 4th. So you're going to spend the early part of your summer here in the Black House with us. And that will all begin next week as we read the first 2 chapters of Black House. So that look forward to that. Everyone get your copy of the book and start reading Black House. And that means you too, Matt. I want those first 2 chapters on my door by tomorrow morning.
Yes, sir. Anyway, remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit at r/doofmedia is also a great place to hang out and talk with other constant readers. Of course, there is no discussion question this week, but you can still go to any of those places and just kind of vibe with everybody.
I actually do have it's not a discussion question, but I do have a question for our listeners.
Okay.
So, I'm going to say this I'm going to choose my words very carefully and be very specific here. If we were to do a season 3 of the show, let's call it a greatest hits season, where we kind of not totally, but mostly abandon the concept of doing Dark Tower adjacent novels and just do like, okay, before you wrap up, Matt, here are the 3, 4, 5 Stephen King novels that haven't fit into Dark Tower or Dark Tower adjacent that you absolutely 100% have to read. So my question to our listeners are, if we were to do something like that, what would be the books? Give us an example of 1 or 2 of the books that you think are absolutely must-haves on that list. Don't give us like 20 books. Give us 1 or 2 books that you think. We're not going to read these out aloud on the show next week. We're not going to do anything like that. But I just want to start like collating data. So you can send those. You can talk about it on the Reddit, as Matt said. You can just email those to us, whatever you want to do. But just curious, what are your top 2 must reads that Matt already hasn't read or already will not have read by the time we get to the end of the season?
Yeah, awesome. That's a great prompt.
Yeah. And as a reminder, if you want to know what weeks we're covering, what chapters, and what books are remaining in season 2, we do have a link in the show notes of every single episode that takes you to a wonderful spreadsheet that breaks down the entirety of season 2. We had someone recently reach out and ask us if we're covering The Stand. And so this is my way of answering, yes, we will be covering The Stand. After we finish with the Black House in July, we will be moving right on to our final book in season 2, which will be The Stand, which is going to be 16 weeks with that one. It's 4 months with The Stand. It's a big boy, and we're going to be spending a lot of time with it. So yes, and check the spreadsheet if you want to know when and where we'll be covering that.
Cool.
And of course, if you're not subscribed to Kingslingers, I mean, gosh, has there ever been a better time, Matt, than 2 years ago?
Yeah.
But also right now.
Yeah. Second best time is today.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And if you like any of our shows on the Doof Network, including this one, of course, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks to new patrons, Spider Z, Crystal H, and Edward H. Welcome. We hope you enjoy me and Scott talking about silly stuff over on the secret, private, no trespassers podcast feed, and all the other cool stuff we have over there on the Patreon.
Yeah, upcoming in May, we are doing another episode of Other Levels of the Tower, which is our Patreon exclusive podcast where we look at adaptations, and we are going to be covering Gerald's Game, which I'm very, very excited about. So if you haven't checked out other levels of the tower yet, May will be the time to do it for sure.
All right.
And of course, if you cannot afford to donate to us right now, that is, as always, absolutely okay. There are still tons of ways to help us out that aren't financial ones. As I always say, you can share this podcast and keep sharing it. We keep being told that people are trying out the podcast because someone else told them about it, especially this week's Spotlight reviewer, Stupid Tom, who gives us 5 stars and says, I'm 2 years behind, but I love these guys. I finished The Dark Tower and immediately started listening to this based on a suggestion on Reddit. So thank you, someone on Reddit who did that. Matt and Scott are simply incredible. I'm 2 years behind, but I listen to like 2 or 3 episodes a day. I feel like they're my friends at this point. I even had a weird dream where I was hanging out with Matt. I spend more time listening to them than I do my actual family. I hope to be someday current. Matt, what'd you do? What'd you do with Tom?
Okay, look, I did step into his dream briefly. I was disoriented and my astral projecting got a little thrown off. And I hope that it wasn't weird. I mean, I had a good time. And the less said, the better, really.
All right. Well, one thing I know for sure is that Stupid Tom is anything but stupid.
Yes. Thank you, Stupid Tom, for your delightful comments.
Yes, and thank you everyone else who has taken the time to leave those ratings and reviews. By the way, Stupid Tom's review is the last review I have in my queue, so I have nothing to read for next week. And I believe, what did we say, Matt? We said every week without a review would be one less King book that you would ever read. So on the chopping block next week is let's see, what is it? Cujo.
Yeah.
If we don't get a review by this time next week, Matt will never read Cujo.
Never. Not only not for the show, but just
never.
I won't be allowed to. Yeah.
Do you want to do that to him? Do you want to do that to Matt? Just leave a review. Just write 5 words,
please.
But just write, Matt, please read Cujo.
Please, I want to read Cujo.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for us this week. Go read Cujo, leave us some ratings and reviews, and we'll see you back here next week as we begin Stephen King and Peter Straub's Black House. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.